Hey, it's Mandy Moore.
Sterling K. Brown.
And Chris Sullivan from That Was Us.
Spring is finally here. And if you're like us, you're looking for little ways to bring new energy into your home, starting with your bed.
I love everything about Brooklinen. I love the variety of colors. I love the texture. I love the coolness up against my skin. I'm a man who runs hot. These sheets keep your boy cool, and I love them.
Brooklinen makes it so easy to refresh your space with layers that feel light, breathable, and so comfortable. Finding sheets you love can be tricky, but Brooklinen nails it every time.
Brooklinen offers so many different tones and textures, which is great, since new colors can make your bedroom feel fresh and inviting. Plus, their lightweight, airy fabrics are perfect for sun-kissed mornings and cozy nights.
And the best part? Brooklinen has everything you need, from soft sheets to the perfect throw blankets to style and layer your bed effortlessly.
It's no wonder they have over 100,000 five-star reviews. People love them. So if you're ready to refresh your space, now is the time.
Shop award winners and fan faves in-store and online at brooklinen.com. That's BROOKLINEN.com. Get 15% off your first order today.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I'm joined, as usual, by Ken Katkin, a professor of law at Chase Law School. Ken, welcome once again to The Politics Guys.
Hey, Trey, it's great to be back.
Yeah, we aren't we haven't been on recently. We had some delays as a result, and that was wonderful. I got to be on spring break, but we're back, and now we get the true voices of the Politics Guys reason, which I think is you and me, right? Like we have sane, we have a sane, not left guy in me. We have a sane left person in you, and we'll let everybody else figure out who the unsane people are on the show. I tease. But I was warning, Ken, we were talking about this a little bit as we were preparing for it. This might be one of the, some shows I will actually build them because people wonder, how much space does Trey and Ken really have? And we actually have some significant space on some issues. And so I'll always play that up when we have those kind of shows. I'm not sure how much space between us we're going to have today on this show. So if you don't like people agreeing, just a forewarning right out of the gate. But we've got some really good things we want to take a look at. And top of that list for me is the so-called American Liberation Day. I really wanted to lead the show with this. And here's what happened earlier this week. Trump began by saying, quote, "My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the American industry was reborn, the day Americans' destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again," end quote. And so these historic, in President Trump's terms, tariffs were designed to bring us out of desolation. As Trump put it, quote, "For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike," end quote. And that's a real key element for me when I have looked at this carefully. It isn't just enemies that we are purposefully hurting. We're attempting to hurt our allies. And I think this falls into a broader pattern of authoritarian drift in the Trump administration. I'll get to that in a minute. I want to continue to talk about these tariffs, though, on their face. And so how do we avoid tariffs? Trump was very blunt in the Rose Garden. He said, quote, "If you want your tariff rate to be zero, then you should build your product right here in America," end quote. So what are these historic tariffs? So we already have the baseline 10% tariff right across the board. On top of that is an additional rate, and there is some controversy about this. So I've been looking at this, but to the best of my calculation, to the best of what I have seen from other economists and political scientists, it is simply a division product by which we are trying to calculate our import deficit. And so when you do that the way the Trump administration seemingly is doing, that adds China to another 34% tariff on top of that baseline, 46% for Vietnam, 20% for the European Union, 24% for Japan, and for other trading partners, which are smaller for us comparatively, they range from 26 to 36%. Now, seemingly on top of that, although again, there is some debate, there is also a 25% automobile tariff. So for example, if Japan at this moment was bringing a car into the United States, it seems at this juncture right now that tariff would be a 10% plus 24% plus 25%. But those additional tariffs, which seemingly are stackable, again, 25% on automobiles, 25% on steel and aluminum, and 25% on semiconductor material and pharmaceuticals. So that's a lot of tariffs that we have to think about. Now, I am the resident libertarian here for the Politics Guys. As a matter of fact, Ken, right outside here and on my door, I have a door plaque that says, Dr. Harold Orndorff, resident libertarian on my door. So, I advertise this. Everybody knows this. This is not a big surprise if you listen to the show. And probably nowhere am I more libertarian than when it comes to economic policy. So it's probably not going to be a big shock what comes next. I'm not shocked. I don't think anybody who has probably even just taken macroeconomics recognizes yesterday the S&P 500 wiped out $2 trillion with a T in value. Small cap stocks have entered an actual bear market in the course of a single day, sending the Russell 2000 to a 5-year single day loss record. In short, the indices plummeted. Now, maybe all of this is part of that short-term pain, says Trump administration officials. Well, that was all just yesterday, Thursday, April 3rd. Today, while of course Friday, April 4th, markets haven't closed. As of this show's recording, the Dow has already dropped below 3 percentage points additionally from yesterday, just today, and the S&P 500 has shed 3.5%. Now, again, there are reasons to like or not like former President Biden, but Trump has always long argued, Ken, that we ought to think about how successful presidents are on the basis of the stock market. I think he said that more than once in a Truth Social post. So if we want to do a little comparison today, if we want to take a look at that, the Dow under Biden rose by 39 points and the S&P 500 by 55.7 points. So far we're a little bit short of that in the Trump administration. But let's get down to some of the brass tacks. You may agree or may not disagree, but I think it's a good place to start when you're trying to think a little bit like an economic libertarian. Even the Cato Institute has come out and said that this is a terrible, terrible, terrible plan. These tariffs, and they're going to be relatively sympathetic. The Cato Institute has said, as they have calculated, will increase taxes by somewhere in the vicinity of $300 billion for us as citizens. Now, the goal, and I think Trump is pretty straightforward, the goal of this in part is to pay for his other tax cuts. But of course they can't because they are in fact taxes. But we'll put that to the pause for right now. What's really crazy about this is I know many on the right are saying, look, this is what we have to do. We have to be more restrictive because the rest of the world is restrictive. But again, I'm going to turn to the Cato Institute. The Cato Institute already notes that we have some of the most restrictive policies in the world. So before anything Trump did, we already, for just one particular example, since he was doing things on automobiles, we already have a 25% duty on light trucks, which compares to a 10% duty for the EU and a 0% duty in Japan. That's right, 0. Heck, we don't even allow foreign shipping and foreign built vessels to be used in domestic commerce. We have one of the most restrictive on those fronts. And that's even before we get end to the all kinds of subsidies that we give to agricultural semiconductors and renewable energy. So again, whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, those are obviously different kinds of practices that we are going out. So Ken, I want to get to Adam Smith in a minute, but I've talked a while here. So what's your left wing? I mean, because in some ways, the left often is more sympathetic. They want to have some kinds of domestic policies, often for workers, but this seems to maybe exceed even what kind of your standard, union Democrat would be interested in doing. So give us that perspective before I give us more of my free market crazy stuff.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am more sympathetic in principle to some tariffs than probably you are, Trey. And actually, I will say, when you quoted the Cato Institute, the Cato is a libertarian institute, so I would not have expected. Yeah, but you were saying even they're against the tariffs. Like, I was thinking, of course they'd be against the tariffs. They're libertarians like you. But I think tariffs can have a role if they're thoughtful and targeted and have certain goals. So, for instance, you did mention the light truck one that we've had for a long time. We've had that because our government bailed out the Detroit motor companies during the Obama administration, and part of the concept there was that if we were going to bail out our automobile industries, which essentially were both very important to the economies of Michigan, but actually not competitive with foreign competition, then we needed to unlevel that particular playing field a little bit. We need to make sure that that Detroit, which was in a leadership role in light trucks as opposed to being in sedans and things like that, where people would rather buy Toyotas, that they had that leadership role in light trucks. The tariff protected that leadership role in light trucks, and that meant that GM and Ford, after having been bailed out by the government, had a much better shot at surviving, thriving, staying around. So I think that kind of tariff is okay. I think a tariff directed to protect American laborers against competition from very low wage countries can be okay. But I don't, most of these tariffs are directed at countries where the wages are actually higher than ours. So that concept wouldn't apply at all. The EU, Canada, places like that are higher wage countries than here. So it's not like they're engaging in unfair competition by having very low paid labor. And these are obviously not targeted at protecting particular industries that are particularly significant to certain regional economies in the United States. This is just a mass tax on the American people. And I think, as you pointed out, maybe indirectly, so I want to tie together two threads that you said. It's much bigger than it even seems, because the tariffs, as sales taxes that the American consumer is actually going to pay. On average, that's probably going to cost about the average consumer about 3% of their income. If they're wealthier Americans, it's going to be only about 2% of their income because they spend less. If they're poorer Americans that spend a bigger part of their income, it might be about 4%. But it's actually costing a lot more than that, because it's also tanking the stock markets so badly. So the tariffs themselves have already caused Americans who have 401ks or other kinds of stock mutual funds or things, on average, to have lost about 10% in just a couple of days of the net worth that they keep in the stock market. In addition to charging them a 3% average additional sales tax on every single thing they buy.
Yeah, and so let me come away a little bit from, and I'll get there in a minute, because I am, I'm going to be less tariff than you on some of even those targeted points. But even if we're going to accept that goal, which I'll come along for that ride for a minute, I think you're accurately hitting some of the problems, right? So, for example, if you are hoping to protect American jobs, that assumes that the industries in which you're having these tariffs, that you are giving them time to actually create those jobs in the United States. I think one of the things that seemingly just does not occur as part of the discourse is a thoughtful, let's think about here, let's be really specific. Let's talk about semiconductors, right? We do not produce many semiconductors in the United States, almost none. And there's a variety of potential reasons for that. But let's assume that you want, and it's a good thing, and we want to have domestic manufacturing of semiconductors in the United States. there is no universe in which that happens in the course of months. So even if every single person was motivated today, if every single actor said, I absolutely want to shift, let's say that Apple, one of the bigger producers of those with their own ingrown chips, working right now with Taiwanese companies, said, we want every single chip to be made in the United States. Even a company with that amount of income could not have all of their semiconductors made in the United States within a year. It'd be impossible, right? If every single actor wanted that to happen. And so one of the other problems with, even if we're going to accept, I think, a flawed position, but let's start there, the idea that we want to kind of pull those jobs here, the idea that you put it on all today is going to have some kind of immediate impact, like, oh, tomorrow we're going to be producing semiconductors in the United States, isn't just laughable. It is deeply it's not even a childish view of economics. It's not even a childish view of manufacturing. It's just outright craziness.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. That's why, I was saying I do have some sympathy for the tariff that we've had on light trucks because we had a particular goal there, right? Like we're producing light trucks.
Those things were already being manufactured in the United States to some extent, right?
Yes. The idea is that they are being manufactured in the United States, and maybe Toyota could make them a little cheaper and a little better, but we're really trying to not let Toyota drive GM and Ford out of business. So we want to protect that. So I think a concept of what it is that we're trying to protect from competition is sort of the starting point for any kind of protectionism. Whereas here, there's just no concept of that at all in these mass tariffs.
Yeah. But now I do want to push a little bit there because I'm going to say that kind of view, which in economic circles, that's what's called import substitution industrialization. As a matter of fact, most prominently done in a democracy by India. The idea is that if you protect particular industries, like, again, let's go back to the light trucks, right? So we recognize that in Japan, Toyota is making better, slightly cheaper light trucks than, say, GM can in the United States. If we create import substitution, that in the long run, that will give runway for, say, GM to be able to produce trucks as efficiently eventually as they did in Japan. And then the long-term goal for that ISI kind of movement is that you can then bring those tariffs down over time. But again, one of being as I understand the plight of workers on that front, I'm not ignoring that, but there has simply not been, as a comparative politics, ISI, that kind of model. What generally happens is you begin to lower the tariffs, and the same thing that happened 10 years ago happens all over again. And so the only way to make that work is generally to keep those tariffs permanently, which is, I think, a potentially economic problem. What do you think about that? I mean, that's a little bit further afield than what Trump is doing here.
It's a value judgment, right? Because I basically agree with your description of it. I think probably, whenever we lift the tariffs on the light trucks and have free and fair competition with imports, I don't have any faith that there's any time frame where the American companies are going to make the cheaper, better cars. But I think if the idea is it worth it though, to that Americans will have to pay a little more for the Toyota light trucks, and in exchange for that, some of them will just decide to pay it. Some of them will decide to substitute to the GMs or Fords, which are now at the dealership a little bit cheaper because the tariff's not built in. That keeps Detroit's economy going. And so I think it's a value judgment, but I think it can be worth it. I don't rule it out of hand. That I mean, I agree with you that it has an economic cost, that free trade maximizes economic efficiency. But I think that some of these economic costs are worth paying. I think steel was another one, which I think has been a constant one because Pennsylvania is such a battleground state, right? But they make the steel in Pennsylvania, and you could say, well, that's just it's just the arbitrariness of that's an industry that's getting some protectionism because it's an industry that politicians need to pander to. Absolutely. But I would also look at it as it actually is important. And Pittsburgh's done better than a lot of other cities at diversifying its economy, but Pittsburgh is still, pretty dependent on steel. And I think it's worth a little bit of protectionism to keep our, historic, major kind of economic engines being able to provide jobs in regions where they are. I think it's not great. Detroit probably had more of a collapse already than would be optimal, and I think there is a role for that. But again, it has nothing to do with the tariffs that we're seeing
Yeah.
today because this
Yeah.
is all thoughtless and mindless.
Well, I'll say I think part of the problem, and then I want to get back to the Trump because I think we haven't quite talked about everything in terms. I think there is some authoritarianness happening here as well, and I want to get to that. But I do want to say, like, as the last thought there, one of my fundamental as a libertarian problems is again, if we even accept that we want to, like, you call them like the fundamental engines of society, the problem is who gets to decide that? And I think you started to hit the nail right on the head. Generally speaking, it's the individuals in industry who have the most sway, not necessarily that are perhaps the biggest parts of the economic of our engine, but they happen to be residing in a state that is important for elections. And so one of my problems with thinking about tariffs in that context is we don't the desire to protect particular industries does not seem related to their actual overall potential impact on labor markets as much as they are concentrated in areas in which presidential votes occur. And ergo, it's hard for me sometimes when you look at the GDP impact for particular kinds of industry to say, well, look, if we're going to count something as an economic engine, if cars are going to be one, which is actually not one of our biggest producers, why not these other items? Oh, well, because they're coming from states that I don't think have that. But let's pause on that for a second, because I think you're right. We're kind of getting away from today's question, which is these are not that, right? We're not having a nuanced debate. The Trump administration is not having some nuanced debate about what level of import substitution should we be considering. I mean, that would be, I'd love to have that debate. I'd love for our president to be having that, because that's at least a principled debate that we can have conversations about in economic policy. Instead, we have this haphazard application of it. And you perfectly pointed it out a second ago, and I hadn't gotten to that yet. Many of these don't even meet the level of the import substitution model because we're imposing them on countries that have the same, if not higher in some cases, wages in which we are, right? There's no universe in which the European Union is paying lower wages than we are on average paying to workers if we're just doing it on aggregate. So the idea that we're going to target the European Union, this seems to me, Ken, to fit precisely in with what we saw on the signal leak, what we see in terms of the Trump rhetoric when we were going over to the EU. This idea, you guys are the bad guys. The EU, you guys are the evil ones, and we've got to fight against you. And the implication, it hasn't been said, I think, quite out loud, but I think the quiet part there is, and the good people are the Hungaries and the Russias of the world. And it's becoming just, it just seems to me that we have a very clear picture that is every act that we see the Trump administration take, and these tariffs are an absolute example of that, reinforce that narrative. And I just feel like you have to have your head in the sand if you are not going to recognize that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but I always analyze these things in light of Trump being an actual penetration agent that takes orders from
right. You go one step further than I do. I think he's cozying up, but I hear you.
But it fits that paradigm, right? I mean, ever since the end of World War II and the beginnings of the early Cold War, the United States has had this web of both commercial and trade alliances and political and military alliances with Europe and with the other North American countries. And, that we've had all this soft power and hard power that grows from our close ties with all our allies. And so, blowing up the commercial ties, which of course is blowing up the political and military alliances, it's all part of one thing here. And it serves Russia's interests more than anybody else's, right? I mean, if we damage our economies, we damage the economies of all our allies. We seem like a very unreliable ally who's tilting towards authoritarianism, and that's the image we're giving to our own allies. Then everything blows apart at once: the military alliances and the commercial and trade alliances.
Well, and let's add to that, because there is, in fact, social political science work on this very issue. We call it the democratic peace theory, and what it suggests is that democracies over time naturally become closer to one another. And that leads to trade interactions, which then leads to more closeness between those democracies, which leads to more trade interactions. And it's a positive reinforcing system. It's a good thing in international relations because it means that as countries become more free, they become more interactive. Now, there's some other views that did not pan out, but that one, there is a ton of empirical evidence for that. And so it is in my view, again, there is no universe in which anyone who looks at this can't say this is an attempt to create combative relationships with fellow democratic countries. As a matter of fact, it feels so targeted that the only real purpose that I can get at here is the goal is, in fact, somebody has recognized that and said, well, you could also kind of do it the evil way, which is to say, well, if this is what reinforces, these economic relationships reinforces democratic peace theory, I know how we fix that. Let's get rid of the economic connections. I mean, it's too straightforward.
Yeah, in fact, we didn't even point out, it's been commonly observed that there's about 3 or 4 countries on Earth that were left off this tariff list. Russia is the most prominent. And even with all the sanctions we have against Russia, we in fact do import a lot more from Russia than from many of the countries on the list. And then North Korea and Cuba. I can't even remember if there was a fourth, but
was Hungary
only the most
on the
authoritarian.
list?
What's that?
Was Hungary on the list? I didn't look for Hungary.
I think Hungary is tariffed. Let me
is it?
Yeah, let me double check that.
Okay.
Yeah, Russia, I'm just looking.
Russia, you're right, was not.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't find Hungary right quickly. I'll keep looking, but I can't find it quickly.
That would fall right into that pattern, though, if they are not on the list. I mean, because again, think they have been darlings of the Trump administration.
I see Belarus. Belarus is another authoritarian country that was left off the tariff list. So I'm seeing Belarus, Cuba, North Korea, and Russia are 4 countries that I'm finding are left off the list. But I can't find. I'm not sure about Hungary.
Well, we'll put that in a maybe category because I do not recall seeing it. I don't have that list right in front of me this second, but I looked at that as you did for similar reasons. But that would fit that pattern.
But again, some of the countries on the list, including Albania, Paraguay, and Fiji, import much less to the United States than Russia does, and some of the places on the list import literally 0 to the United States because there's these uninhabited islands off Australia that actually made the list, Heard Island and the McDonald Islands and Christmas Island, and then Svalbard up north of Iceland made the list, and these are places that basically nobody lives and there's no economy, but they made the list.
Well, I mean, listen, you got to make sure to put the important ones on there. Don't worry about Russia.
Yeah.
We'll have some joint exercises with Russia before you know it. But let's move forward a little bit, Ken, because I think there is a connection between that and then what happened yesterday in terms of the NSC and the NSA. So yesterday, far-right activist Laura Loomer, who, I don't know if you know this, Ken, but I'm going to take credit for this one. Did you know you can't spell child groomer without Laura Loomer? I just want to throw that out there.
Maybe no one will try to steal the credit for that one from you.
Be that as it may, be those fun little alliterations as they may, according to most reports today, is potentially behind the ouster of numerous NSC officials. While there is no official comment, Trump has said that he respects and listens to Loomer, who, among her other assertions, believes that 9/11 was an inside job perpetrated by the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, of course. The firings include the head of the NSA and the U.S. Cyber Command. However, Trump has argued that the firings have nothing particularly to do with Loomer, which is really weird. There's kind of a back and forth on this. He says, quote, "We're always going to let go of people we don't like, or people that take advantage of, or people that may have loyalties to someone else," end quote. You want to talk about saying the quiet part out loud, or people that may have loyalties to somebody or something else. That's just terrible. The removal of General Hu, as reported by the BBC, does appear to be a part of a wider purge of top security officials. It's not clear if those are related to the NSC, and the White House is not officially talking. However, you might recall the general did testify in some negative ways on Capitol Hill last week about that signal leak, so there are some questions about that. Administration officials not speaking on the record primarily have said that Loomer simply sealed the fate of individuals on that list. Again, as Trump has put it, Loomer is, quote, a great patriot, and, quote, she makes recommendations. Sometimes I listen to those recommendations, end quote. Again, I kind of want to put her in, context. She is inflammatory, to say the least, deeply anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant. Probably, again, the craziest of her positions have to do with the 9/11 attacks. She's been banned from multiple social media platforms, and it appears to have had a baby with Elon. If I have all that right.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Which is interesting in and of itself, and they've been having a battle over that, which brings Elon's baby count up. I think to what is it now, like 13 across how many different women? I've lost count. I'm not gonna lie. But her activism has included all kinds of provocative actions. So just the fact that Laura Loomer was in the White House is shocking, but that her list appears to be even potentially the list that would then come to firings today is it is unthinkable in recent history that would be the way that something like this goes down. So Ken, thoughts about these firings? Again, it's kind of hard in some way because NSC things, NSA stuff, we don't always have all this data. You got to take some of these things in the context of how we have information. But
Yeah.
what do you think about this? Again, we have some speculation, I recognize. I just want to say that.
Hey, it's Mandy Moore.
Sterling K. Brown.
And Chris Sullivan from That Was Us.
Spring is finally here. And if you're like us, you're looking for little ways to bring new energy into your home, starting with your bed.
I love everything about Brooklinen. I love the variety of colors. I love the texture. I love the coolness up against my skin. I'm a man who runs hot. These sheets keep your boy cool, and I love them.
Brooklinen makes it so easy to refresh your space with layers that feel light, breathable, and so comfortable. Finding sheets you love can be tricky, but Brooklinen nails it every time.
Brooklinen offers so many different tones and textures, which is great, since new colors can make your bedroom feel fresh and inviting. Plus, their lightweight, airy fabrics are perfect for sun-kissed mornings and cozy nights.
And the best part? Brooklinen has everything you need, from soft sheets to the perfect throw blankets to style and layer your bed effortlessly.
It's no wonder they have over 100,000 five-star reviews. People love them. So if you're ready to refresh your space, now is the time.
Shop award winners and fan faves in-store and online at brooklinen.com. That's BROOKLINEN.com. Get 15% off your first order today.
Yeah. So first, I think just because there's all this alphabet soup, maybe we could explain to the listeners the difference between NSC and NSA and what they are.
Yes, the National Security Agency, National Security Council. Yes, please do that. Do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So National Security Council is a part of the political apparatus of the White House. So even though it has national security in the name, it's not really part of the Defense Department. It's part of the White House's political apparatus, and so it would typically be populated by political appointees of the president who are trying to advance the president's agenda. It's not part of the professional military. Now NSA, on the other hand, is part of the Department of Defense. It's entirely a U.S. military operation. It's primarily staffed by military personnel. They have some civilian employees as well who do things like work as cryptographers and things. But it's located at a big military base at Fort Meade in Maryland, which is about halfway between D.C. and Baltimore. It's a very, very large compound. It has its own exit from the interstate highway because so many people work there and stuff. And it's in charge of signals intelligence, which means it's basically in charge of all the wiretapping that the U.S. military does outside the United States, around the world.
Well, and pause. This is the same
yeah.
organization in which there had been questions and had potentially done stuff with domestic wiretapping. So if you remember some of those scandals and the information that came out, that's the organization we've talked about in the past. But keep going.
Yeah.
Going.
So Edward Snowden was accusing them, and he was a contractor. He wasn't military personnel himself, but the Snowden allegations were against NSA. Yeah. So NSA has this tremendous military or technological capability to pretty much pick up signals anywhere, and no matter how encrypted they are, to figure out ways to decrypt them and decode them. So that's always been part of the professional military, and it's even though its existence is no longer secret. When they first created it, they tried to keep its existence secret for a while, and it even had like a blank line item in the budgets that Congress would enact, so you couldn't see what that money was going to. But eventually, something that big couldn't keep its existence secret, but its operations are very secretive, very top secret, classified, and by all accounts, it's not typically ever been run on any kind of political or politicized basis. It's a professional signals intelligence gathering operation. So the two agencies are have different roles in our government. So the National Security Council is headed by the National Security Advisor. And that's a person who's been in the news lately. That's Mike Waltz, right?
Yep.
And so Waltz, who is actually the person who invited the Atlantic Monthly editor Goldberg onto into the Signal chat, is the Trump political appointee. He was recently a congressman in Florida and joined the Trump administration, and doesn't seem to have a high regard for the security protocols. But
no, I don't want to interrupt you, but this isn't a whole story today. But something else to just be aware that did happen is it came to light today that not only has that happened, but Waltz has been using Gmail accounts.
Yeah,
for
his ordinary communications,
dealing with military communications, even if it, Anyway, just want to that is something we're aware of, but there's not a lot of talk about on that front. But continue.
Yeah, because Waltz is more concerned about not letting the professional militaries who are military personnel with proper security clearances who might come in with the next administration. He doesn't want to let the posterity have any access to these his professional emails, but he doesn't care if the America's enemies in real time get access to them. So that's a whole different story. Yeah, but anyhow, so Waltz has obviously he's got a lot of egg on his face about the signal chats, and Loomer, I guess, considered him to be a neocon, is how I understand this. Which is also very paradoxical to me, and you might have to help me understand the right a little bit better. But as I understand this, the G.W. Bush people who launched the Iraq War would be considered to be the neocons, and Trump apparently campaigned on a more humble foreign policy, that making America great again would be kind of withdrawing from engagement with the world. And so Loomer apparently is part of that movement, and so she's very against the G.W. Bush types, and so she's comes in with this list of Waltz and a lot of his deputies, and who Trump has all just appointed, all of them, and says these people are they're Republicans, but they're actually neocons, so they come from the wrong wing of the party. They want to be too militarily aggressive. Now she's telling this to Trump, who's being like ridiculously militarily aggressive towards Greenland, towards Canada, towards Panama, and really and now towards the Houthis in Yemen. And it's really quite hard for me to understand any and where the space is between the kind of bold interventionist views of the neocons who are being disparaged here, and the bold interventionist rhetoric of Trump.
That's a really good point. And it might be worth something chatting about here for just a second, right? Because I think it is difficult today to keep up with what the Republican Party is ideologically speaking, right? So when you think of Republicans, I think the word that most comes to mind is conservative. And historically speaking, the Republican Party was predominantly conservative ideologically. I would say kind of in the more J, here on the show, in the kind of J fashion a little bit, maybe. And then with, 25-ish, 20% of that coalition being more economic conservatives like myself, but not because we're precisely conservative, but because we have some economic overlap there, right? That we didn't feel with Democrats on those points. But that really begins to change as you get to the Trump era. Trump is not and never has claimed to be a conservative. I mean, he is a populist or an authoritarian populist, and Laura Loomer definitely fits into that vein. And so today, when we think about the Republican Party, I was just reading and interviewing some individuals on this. The contemporary Republican Party, there are really no conservative ideological members left, at least in Congress. There's a few outliers. Thomas Massey is kind of a conservative libertarian. Rand Paul kind of probably falls into that category there. I would say out here in Oklahoma, Langford is still in that kind of more conservative realm. But in other words, we can almost list on one, maybe two hands, the number of conservatives that are really left. And what we now have is this kind of authoritarian populist with a sprinkling of the Loomer conspiracy theorists. And so for that view, on the foreign policy side, what they kind of call the neocons or the George W. Bushes of the world was they are the interventionist at the expense of the United States. And so that's what makes some of these things weird, I think, if you haven't kept up with it. It's not that they are anti-conflict. What they are anti is intervention in other countries that does not immediately benefit the United States. So if you're taking over Greenland, woo-hoo, because now we control and own Greenland. If we're trying to democracy build, you're a neocon who believes in democracy, and you're somehow going to make the world a better place through international relations. And I think that's the primary distinction there, honestly, Ken.
I appreciate that. That actually helps me understand what was going on here. So Loomer was, I guess, accusing Waltz and his deputies of being the kind of neocons who might potentially promote military intervention. Now, I take it that the Trump's recent interventions against the Houthis in Yemen would sort of fall under that neocon kind of umbrella, right? He wasn't trying to take over Yemen. He was just trying to,
but he's not trying to democratize anybody. His actions are not trying to necessarily bring additional democracy to the world, right? I mean, if you think about whether you agreed with it or didn't, right? The George W. Bush view was American strength could be used to democracy build via force, right? Why are we gonna, we're not just gonna bomb Afghanistan and stop them from attacking us. We're going to take them over, and we're going to try to do some kind of nation state building. And again, whether we agree with the intervention in Iraq or not, that's ultimately what they attempted to do, right? Was, okay, we're not just going to come in, seize the national oil, even if that's maybe one of the reasons we want it, but we're going to try to build a democratic country in Iraq. I think it's that element that is specifically the bridge too far. So if you just want to go bomb somebody, that doesn't seem to be the big issue. It seems to be like, okay, go bomb them, and then they're going to stop doing their things. Don't be a George W. Bush democracy promoter. That I honestly think that's the actual Rubicon between the two.
That's perfect. I mean, that gives me a much better understanding. So so I guess I don't know what her reason was that she thought that these Waltz and his deputies were going to promote democracy worldwide. I don't see any evidence of it.
On X, she had posted in response to the meeting effectively that the way we knew this was that they are patently disloyal to Trump. Now that leaves a lot of questions open. But that is kind of that base level, the other side of that, what I call authoritarian populism, right? This idea that you have not given if you don't give proper kudos to the king, then you're suspect.
Did she? I don't know why she thought that they hadn't given proper.
That's an interesting question. I don't know, but I'm just saying that's her self-reported answer is they weren't loyal enough to Trump.
So anyhow, apparently he's not going to fire Waltz even if Laura Loomer wants him to, because he's afraid that it'll look like the Democrats succeeded in getting Waltz fired because of the signal scandal. But but he fired all the deputies that she asked, I think, except for one. I think there was one deputy on her list that Trump stuck by, but all the others just got fired, and this whole thing was kind of secretive. And I found the most humorous part of the news reporting on it to be that apparently Congressman Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, who was one of the architects of the fake elector scheme and the January 6th events and all that, he was sitting in the Oval Office the whole time, and he had a scheduled appointment with Trump to talk to Trump about his list of people that he wants Trump to fire. And when Laura Loomer like walked in there, she just basically like cut ahead of him in line, and so he's just sitting there watching her whole thing.
Well, look,
And
you got to let the mistress of Elon in first. Come on,
yes. And it might even seem like I can't quite tell, but because I can't tell, but it might even seem like Trump like, kind of ran out of time and patience by the end of his meeting with Loomer, and so Perry never even did get his meeting where he got to present his list of who he wanted fired from the Trump administration. Yeah, so that all happened. Now I think we should, but the NSC, but I'm sorry, the NSA. Before we forget about that, we were saying that that's a professional military operation. It's run by a general, with a long and distinguished career as a intelligence officer. And as far as I can see, Trump's stated reason for firing the guy is that he was appointed by General Milley. And that anyone appointed by General Milley, who of course Trump himself appointed, must be suspect. I think probably his more secretive reason that he's not saying is that he wants to politicize even the most professional and non-political parts of the Defense Department. Just like if the U.S. is collecting signals intelligence, I think Trump would like to have the opportunity to use that for his own personal and political reasons, and not just have it used for national security reasons. And so he'd like to spy on some people, and just because he's curious, and that he doesn't, a professionalized military operation of the NSA would be an impediment to that.
Yeah. Well, let's try to at least get maybe one story, maybe two more stories in. One is we've got all this going on. What's kind of been the response from the other side? One thing this week, obviously, worth mentioning was Senator Cory Booker's record-breaking speech, attempting to highlight, not particularly this because it came before some of these revelations, but it definitely is an attack on Trump policy. And again, if we don't spend but just a few seconds here, it is worthwhile to bring it up if for no other reason than he did in fact break the longest. So he talked for 25 hours and 6 minutes, held that floor. Of course, Storm Thurmond was the last who, trying to stop the Civil Rights Act, spoke for 24 hours and 18 minutes. So a pretty big, the biggest jump we've ever seen over that right. So again, he was trying to stop the 1957 Civil Rights Act. He was filibustering. And in this case, Booker was sort of filibustering, but not really in a meaningful way against a piece of legislation. He was just holding the floor, which is a possibility. But let's not get into the semantics there. This does seem to be maybe the most publicized move the Democrats have had to maybe counter Trump. Your prediction did not come to pass. The Democrats would use the budget on that. Schumer and others basically said, no, we're not going to do that. And they moved forward, right or wrong. But again, it's early. What, besides the fact that he breaks a record, is there much really to think about in terms of Booker's speech, other than maybe I'm wondering, I'll just say that I think this is really the beginning of his presidential campaign.
Yeah, I do agree. It's the beginning of his presidential campaign, and that's probably the most significant thing about it. But if I would say one other thing about it, this is not my own idea. This is an idea that I read in the Talking Points memo blog, which was written by a guy named Josh Marshall, and he used this the way he wanted to think about the Booker speech is. He said that we're sort of familiar with the idea of a Pyrrhic victory, where somebody wins a battle but it gets them nothing, and he says this is really it's all a response to Chuck Schumer's Pyrrhic defeat. that Schumer lost a battle, but actually that gained something. And the way Marshall was explaining this is he's saying that. Basically, when Schumer just simply capitulated on the budget continuing resolution because the Dems had no strategy for how to move forward otherwise, that was kind of a wake up call for a lot of Dems that, we're just kind of, meandering around with no strategy. We need an actual, kind of opposition strategy. We need to start acting not just like a minority party, but actually like an opposition party. We need to do things. And that even though, what Booker did really was mainly just talking, it wasn't really doing anything, that it was a kind of a shift in emphasis. It's like the Democrats are kind of waking up a little bit and saying that we're going to somehow find ways to fight. And it was actually immediately followed by a few things that were slightly more consequential. The Dems had not every single senator could individually put a hold on presidential nominees, and the Dems had not been using that. And right after Booker's speech, Adam Schiff put some holds on some Trump nominees, and that should stop them from getting hearings unless the Republicans change the rule about that. And so, just the idea that the Booker thing might be an inflection point, not that the Dems have a lot of power, not that they can do a lot, but that their stance is going to be that they're trying to try everything and do what they can.
Well, there's a lot of truth there, and I would go one step further and say I think one of the problems the Democrats have had is that they have ignored the research of Mayhew on Congress, which is even when you do have power, one of the most important things you can do is have position taking. And I think the disarray of Democrats in the wake of their defeat, that they didn't have clear position taking, and that has in fact harmed them. So I would agree to that to an extent. And I think the one thing that Booker's speech, besides again giving him a launching point for making it presidential, was to try to stake out a position, and that seems very unimportant. However, empirically, that kind of position taking is one of the most important things you can do electorally, because it is one of the key ways we decide to reelect or not reelect individuals. I mean, as a populace, so not maybe you or me particularly, but in mass. Let's spend just a couple minutes though, Ken. I don't want to get away. So much happened this week from the Wisconsin, Florida elections to talk a little bit about this. On Tuesday, Susan Crawford, a liberal county judge backed by Democrats, beat Brad Schumel, backed by the GOP for the Wisconsin Supreme Court seat. That seat opened as the result of a Democrat on the Supreme Court retiring. Now, you might say, well, look, how does that work for a Supreme Court case? Well, theoretically, those kinds of races are nonpartisan, but that doesn't stop individuals from being kind of liberal and Democrat or conservative and Republican or whatever we want to call those things. And that particular seat's important in Wisconsin specifically because that gave liberals, i.e. Democrats, a one-seat ideological majority in the state. Now, some people have viewed that as a referendum on Trump, or maybe even more specifically on Elon Musk, who spent tens of millions of dollars for Schumer and also for giving away $1 million for those who were going to vote, which was a questionable action in and of itself. My comment here is I don't think there's too much to be said. As a political scientist, we kind of think of there being two electorates. You have the electorate for these kinds of elections, and it doesn't matter how much money you pour into it. And both Democrats and Republicans were pouring copious amounts of money specifically into Wisconsin, but people do not show up in the same rates. It doesn't matter how much you spend in each of those. And so as political scientists, we call this the two electorates. You have electorates that will show up for the primaries, off-year elections, and then you have your presidential primary, your gubernatorial elections. And those are two different groups of people. And trying to make statements about what that smaller electoral group will do and what it means for that larger electoral group, there is almost zero statistical relationship between it. So, I mean, very well, maybe people are turning against Elon and Trump, but I wouldn't take that race as any kind of bellwether for that one way or the other, because you have a different electorate turning out. But I do think it's interesting that goes down. And I also think probably it's more on the legal side than it might be interesting, some of the ways that Elon apparently is going to continue to use money in races, not using the money, but, giving the money away, having these kinds of drawings that seemingly skirt some election law.
Yeah, well, I think we finally get something to at least have a small disagreement on. So I think it was a referendum because even though I take your point about how special elections generally would have a different electorate than general elections, I don't think that's completely true about the Wisconsin election because the turnout, broke all records for special elections and was quite similar to general election turnout. And in fact, I think the Republican candidate had thought that if he could just get 60% of the people who turned out for Trump in November to turn out for him, then based on the analysis they made of what the turnout would be, across all the candidates, that would secure victory. And in fact, he got 62% of the Trump voters to turn out for him. So he exceeded his goal in terms of turnout. But it turned out not to be enough because the Democrats even exceeded even more by that. And I also think that the 10-point swing, even though it's a close state, and actually the Dems already had the majority on that court, they were just defending it. It was
Right.
the Republicans were trying to get a pickup. Trump did win Wisconsin by 1 point in November, and now you've got this Musk, not only putting a lot of money in, and actually really a lot more money than Soros and other. Even if you add together all the Democratic billionaires, several of whom put in money, you're looking at nowhere near the amount of money that Musk put in. But I think most importantly, Musk physically went down there, so that was different than the Democratic billionaires on the other side. Like Musk went to Wisconsin, he campaigned there all week. He very visibly was, paying people to go vote and talking about how the future of our democracy depends on the outcome of this election, and that really didn't get him anywhere. And so I think that is a rejection of Musk. I don't think it is a coincidence that it was literally the very next day after that election that Trump started, letting it be reported through leaks that he was whispering to his cabinet members that Musk will be gone by next month. And I don't even believe Musk will be gone by next month, but I think Trump saw some need to kind of have it out there that he's distancing himself from Musk because he thought that Musk had been so roundly rejected. And the last thing I'll say about this is we also had those Florida congressional elections, and
Yes.
even though they were very Republican districts where the Republicans won, walking away in both of them, they didn't walk away by nearly what they did a few months ago, right? So you're talking about districts that in the November elections, both of those seats were won by more than 30 points by the Republicans, and then by the April special election this week, they're both winning by 11 to 14% in seats that a few months ago Republicans were winning by 30%. So I do think that's part of a big shift. And in 2017, after Trump won in 2016, there were a handful of special elections in 2017 where the Dems all exceeded expectations. And that did, in fact, predict a midterm election in 2018 where the Dems greatly exceeded expectations.
Yeah. Well, be careful because, of course, we always expect the off party to pick up seats in the midterm elections, right? It is the rare outlier where that is not the case. I will agree with you to an extent. I will say that this does show some of the edges of Elon potentially and his ability to sway. But I do think historically, when we look at the data, we have to be careful about Trump and the referendums on Trump when Trump's not on the ballot, because there is a definitive difference even beyond what I was just discussing, which is the two electorate model that we use in political science. There is in some ways separate electorates among Republicans when Trump is or is not, and so I would be careful. Now, the Florida election is probably, in my estimation, maybe more concerning if you want to think about the midterm elections than the Wisconsin primary election, because again, it was a partisan election. That's going to be more. It's empirically speaking, nonpartisan elections are weird all the time, but the partisan election in Florida is going to be more standard. And so I do agree with you there that narrowing of support is probably better evidence of those kinds of takes, or potentially souring on Republican policies by Republicans. But again, given what we know empirically about nonpartisan races, what we know about the two electorate theory, I'm just not as comfortable using the Wisconsin. But I hear that. But
yeah,
okay.
and I would actually want to agree with you. I want to agree on one point. I think that was much more of a referendum on Musk than on Trump. I think.
Oh,
Musk,
okay, yeah.
Musk showed up there and made himself toxic.
Yeah. Well, and the thought that, I think Musk was a bit of a toxic figure beforehand. So I think maybe in some ways it's more of a shock to Musk. I don't know if Musk recognized that he was the toxic figure.
Yeah. And part of that, we didn't even talk about this, but part of it was, this would have been much more visible to people in Wisconsin than around the country, but he had litigation in that was in the Wisconsin Supreme Court about whether he would be allowed to open Tesla dealerships in Wisconsin.
Yes.
Because Wisconsin is still one of these states where they have a law, which most states used to have, that the dealerships can't be owned by the motor companies, that they have to be independently
owned. And you can't sell directly. So you couldn't go online. Right? So even if they weren't owned, you still can't, say, go to Ford's website and buy a Ford and have it shipped to your house.
Yeah. So, Tesla dealerships are open in a lot of states where Musk actually succeeded in legislative lobbying and getting them to change those laws. But in Wisconsin, he didn't succeed in his legislative lobbying, and he's been suing and suing and suing about it. And basically, it was very clear, I think, to a lot of the Wisconsin voters that part of what was at stake in this election was whether Musk, for his own financial advantage, was going to be able to buy a seat on the court so that he could open up Tesla dealerships in Wisconsin. And that really transcends the kind of ideological issues, I think, and looks just kind of straight corruption. And I think that was part of the toxicity of his presence there.
Yeah. Well, Ken, I think with that, we should probably bring the show to a close. It's been a lot of fun. I do want to point out, though, that, here in just a minute, we're going to be recording our next Constitution show, the 19th Amendment.
Right.
So that'll be a lot of fun. Yeah, it is. We'll finally remember the ladies in the famous words. But we're going to be doing that in a minute. But if you want to have access to that, that means that you're going to need to be, part of our show. We only give out a free sample, a taste test, if you will, for our midweek show. And so I would really encourage you, if you haven't already, just take a couple of minutes, head to politicsguys.com/support and become a supporter of the show. That ability to become a supporter is also down there in the show notes. It is always helpful when you do that. And I know, Ken, that Mike had made this big pitch. We had a drop off on revenue when it came to advertising, and that's across the board. We were really trying to figure out what we're going to do. And we had so many people become a supporter. As a matter of fact, here in a minute, it is phenomenal to me. The number of executive producers has doubled on this show. That's just amazing. And so it means that what many of you've seen has been such an important part of your understanding of American politics is worthy of a few dollars a month or at that discount at the year rate. And so maybe you haven't done that yet, but join some of these incredible people who are keeping the Politics Guys going by becoming yearly supporters, by becoming a supporter, by upping their contribution a little bit, by engaging on our Discord, which is one of the abilities you can do when you are a supporter. But even if you can't do those kinds of things, just the ability to subscribe, rate, and review the show makes things huge for us and does help in a time when advertising revenue is way, way down. Again, you can always reach us at mail@politicsguys.com if you have any kind of questions, or if you're not in a place to financially support the show, but you do want to get that show, we have ways of making that happen. So again, reach out at mail@politicsguys.com. And so I'm really excited to get to announce our executive producer of the Politics Guys. It's going to take me a second. The Politics Guys, those executive producers, and they're amazing. We've got Wilma Marino, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, and Dave Dean, Kathy Anderson, and Jeremy Larson. Thank you all so much for being executive producers. And I can't wait to be able to talk with you on Discord and talk about all the fun stuff that we do. We'll have a brand new episode next week, and we'll have our supporters exclusive show and its preview this midweek. I'll see you then.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,